Bonjour.
Good morning, everyone.
Of this 2022 season of series. Thank you for being here. I will speak in English because I see you're a lot of of people coming from abroad. Just wanted to say that I'm super proud of this year's lineup and theme that I think is super relevant. Can drama be a force for good? I hope we will find some answers during those 2 days. And of course, it was obvious for us to start with an Ukrainian representative of producers, creators, Kateryna Vyshnevska, who came some years ago with her series Hide and Seek that we presented and we were glad to present. We are talking for several months of the situation in Ukraine, and she was the one that suggested this specific session, War and Creation. She invited Maria Feldman to come on stage with her. So please, lady, come on stage. Ladies, Kateryna and Maria. So Kateryna is responsible for strategic direction and development for Film.ua in Ukraine, now staying in England. She's working a lot on scripted, and she developed and executive produces scripted drama projects. She oversees international development and co-production partnerships at Film.ua Group and working on several international projects. She's super active. She's also working on the network of Ukrainian creators all around the world. She's here until the end of the festival. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. She has a lot in her head. Thank you for being here, Kateryna. And thank you, Maria. She's a producer and creator of series. She co-founded Tender Productions, where a lot of series were created, Prisoners of War, and of course Fauda, that we also and loved. During her years at Tender, she co-created False Flag. The series was adapted, of course, as Suspicions with Uma Thurman. She was a producer and on the shooting of Homeland. She did a lot. She does a lot. She founded in 2016 her own company, Masha, based in New York. She's from Ukrainian origins. She lived in Israel, and she's now in the US. So those two ladies know a lot about the word and the war and creation. And please share your thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us. City has a special place in my heart, because that's where Hide and Seek was originally showcased. And I think it is also a very different market to all the other events and festivals around the world because of the focus on creativity. So I was a bit on a road trip recently because of what happened in Ukraine. It just became imperative for us to keep on talking about what's happening and figuring out a way to work in these changed circumstances. But specifically for City, this conversation takes on a new and super interesting angle for me, and that's why I'm excited to be able to talk to Maria here on stage. And I don't know, maybe it makes sense to kind of go back to when we originally met, just to kind of give a bit of a overview of why us.
Yes, thank you, Katya, for inviting me. And Ukraine has a very special place in my heart. I live now in New York, and in New York, people always ask, sorry, the question is not where are you from, but where are you from originally. So if people ask me where are you from, I usually say from Israel. I lived in Israel for most of my adult life. But when they say where are you from originally, I get very confused, because I was born in Soviet Union, in Turkmenistan. But Turkmenistan is not my really home country. I don't feel it this way, because all my grandparents from both sides lived in Ukraine. My father was born there and also is buried there. I spent in Kharkiv every summer, and this is kind of, I feel Ukraine is my homeland. So I always go into this long explanation when they ask me where you're from originally. So a few years ago, I was invited to Kiev to a media, how it's called, Media Week?
Kiev Media Week.
Kiev Media Week, and it was an amazing experience. It was my first time in Ukraine in like 20 years, and it reminded me how much I love this place. And I also went just after the festival, I went to Kharkiv and I visited my father's cemetery, and I brought my husband for the first time. So it was very emotional for me. So of course, when the war started, I still have aunt and uncle in Kharkiv, so it was very traumatic until we took them out of there. And a few weeks later, Katya contacted me, and we started talking, like, what can we do, what can be done now during the war for the industry, and also how can we work together. So it was great to be invited, and also to share my experience. You know, Israel lives in a constant state of kind of a war conflict. It's very, very different from what is happening in Ukraine right now, this kind of an active war all over the country. But still, I think we have some experiences that most of the Western world doesn't have. Of you're filming, all of a sudden there is a siren, you say cut, everybody goes to shelter and comes back shooting. It's a normal thing in Israel. And producing, knowing that at any moment there can be a terrorist attack or a bomb or a siren, is something, it's part of our life. Still, again, we're not in an active war. So that's basically, that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I remember when we met in Kiev, you already made it big. You know, that was the reason we wanted to have you over, because you had false flags, and the Absentia was coming, and you worked on Homeland, etc. So your story was super inspirational in that sense, because the way we were looking at it, I mean, Ukraine looks huge on the map, but if you look at the economics of the country, it's not a huge market, and weirdly, the budgets for production in Israel and Ukraine are very comparable. So that was very inspirational in the sense that if Israel can make it so big, then we should be able to as well. And I never imagined that there would be the continuation of that story, is that we'll also, hopefully we're following in the footsteps of Israel in terms of creativity, but I never thought that we would also get the experience of actually creating and producing in these circumstances of war and adversity. And this is the big question for our talk right now, is what does war do to creativity? What do you think? Does it help? Does it inhibit it? What's your experience?
So first of all, I think the war is a terrible thing, and I don't think it should have been said, but I think it's really good for creativity. And I think Israel is an example of that. I think when a lot of people go through a trauma, collective trauma, some of them need to, or have to, or eventually need to process it, and they do it through creating. And Israel is a great example of that. Not a good example. Again, I don't want to say that, you know, the war is good, but we had like the most known 3 films in the beginning of 2000 were all the product of the Lebanese war 20 years before. It was Before, Waltz with Bashir, and Lebanon. The creators were soldiers in this war. It took them 20 years, and they came out with these amazing films. I think it takes time. Usually, Katya always asks me, but not 20 years. We're going to be creative much sooner. As Israel is always also special in this sense, because most of the Israelis go through this trauma at the age of 18, 20, the war trauma. And what is happening in Ukraine right now, there are some adult people, directors, screenwriters who are fighting right now. And I'm sure, I hope, some of them not going to be just traumatized, shock traumatized, but will come out with stories to tell. And I feel that Ukraine right now, like if you look at it as a stock market, it's very low right now, so it's a really great time to invest in it, because I really believe that when it comes out of this war, It's going to be a huge explosion of creativity. It's going to be an amazing place to film. And Ukraine is always an amazing place to film. So, so maybe that can give some hope to the...
Well, yeah, there's like from our experience living through what's happening in Ukraine right now, I'm still a bit confused as to how war affects creativity, because in the immediate aftermath of when bombs started landing on my country, you kind of go into a state of shock, you freeze, and creativity requires headspace. So there were weeks of kind of not being able to do anything, but then there's this anger inside you that kind of is looking for an outlet, and you actually want to be creative. It's another question if you can, but the reality is that you do want to create, to somehow channel the experience and the anger you have into something positive. And in a way, like if we look at the history of art or like all creative media, it was always about war. We kind of forgot in the past couple of generations of not having a world war. That war is almost a state of life in a way. But, sorry, I'm kind of rambling a bit. It's a weird format for a panel. I've never done it before, so hopefully we're doing not too bad of a job. I wanted to show a little reel, actually, to address the question of creativity, but also when does it happen. So the reel that we've put together is made of the titles that were produced since 2014. That's the time of the Crimea annexation and the first time Russia made its ways into Ukraine. And there's a lot of stuff about war. So let's watch it, please.
The evil times have come, my sons. Now, like never before, you should remember that our strength is in our unity. We are all one nation, one family, one joy, and one sorrow.
Нашу землю нам берегти.
And if any one of us is under a threat of an inevitable doom, not one of us should ever stand aside.
Yesterday we received an ultimatum from the Russians.
You really think you are free people?
I'll kill everyone who lives in these mountains.
You belong to us. So you say there is no hope?
Cherkasy will make a stand.
Move it! Move it!
I'm going to Ukraine.
These are my mountains. I am the Lord here. And those who come to my home and tell me how I should live will spit out their guts, I swear by God.
Because this is our land. We will stand our ground.
Only by helping each other, we can overcome any umbrage and any misfortune.
If you don't want to burn in hell, just drop your weapons and leave!
I am the Lord here. And any misfortune, only by helping each other, we can overcome any umbrage and any misfortune.
If you don't want to burn in hell, just drop your weapons and leave!
So I think the points I want to make is that we will be talking and be creative sooner than 20 years from now. But then I also am realizing that I never thought about it until actually it hit us as well. That's what you've been living through in Israel. That was, decades of that experience. And how does that affect what you do, the stories you tell? Like, can you imagine telling stories not somehow connected with what's happening in Israel? Anything you can share?
So of course, Israel does a lot of, as you know, conflict-related and spy shows, but of course we have also great dramas and great comedy, so it's absolutely, like in Israel, sadly, the conflict is normalized. It's like a part of life. Like in the US, there are mass shootings. In Israel, there are terrorist attacks and some bombing once in a while. It's very sad to say, but that's the thing, and we just live with it. When we produce our shows, we absolutely don't think like Israeli shows. We don't think about it. We don't plan for it. There is no special things we do. There is no special insurances. But when we have productions coming from abroad, it has its effects. When the situation is getting warmer, the productions get canceled. I have this experience, very unpleasant experience with Homeland Season 2. They filmed Season 2, 2 episodes in Israel and had an amazing time, had the best experience. And they were planning on coming in Season 3 to film even more. And we were already in pre-production. They were supposed to come like in a month. And all of a sudden in Israel, it was very quiet, but there was a war in Syria going on back then. And Barack Obama, like went into this, like he said that he's gonna bomb Syria, and Syria said that if US gonna bomb Syria, they're gonna bomb Israel. And we hear it all the time, but all of a sudden in the US, it was like front news. Usually the Syrian war is not front news in the US, but it was front news. And all of a sudden we get a phone call, we're not coming. And we were like, what? Nothing is happening. It's so quiet right now. There is nothing going on. They were like, no, the insurance pulled us off. So like that, just from the headlines in the US, without anything real happening on the ground, we lost a big production. There was in, I think 2015, or 14, we were filming False Flag and Fauda, first season, at the same time were filmed when there was the last war in Israel. It was 50 days of a constant, I don't want to say bombing, but every day we had the sirens in Israel. The missiles are intercepted, so almost nothing is falling on the ground, but still you have these sirens going on a few times a day all over Israel. And we kept filming False Flag and Fauda. We did some changes. We were supposed to go south where the situation is worse, so we pushed it to the end of the filming, and with Fauda we did some changes, but we kept filming. But Dig and Tyrant, 2 big American productions that were filming at the same time, had to leave within a day. And it traumatized the American industry for a while. They did not come for a few years because it cost them a lot of money and a lot of stress. Just from one day to another, the insurance told them, okay, you have to leave now. So it does have effect on the international productions coming to Israel, but they're still coming. I have to say, we constantly have international productions filming in Israel. Every time there is like a war, they get into a bit of a shock. After a year, they forget about it and they come again. And I think what it does to us as producers in Israel, it makes us very resilient, I think, because like nothing is really a big problem and we do it no matter what. I think it's also one of the strengths of the Israeli industry.
This is actually how I choose to look at it as well. I kind of, I'm calling it almost like functional creativity, because we talked about it last night, that kind of nothing is going to stop us. We have to do what we do. And we're actually resuming filming in Ukraine. It's a bit easier for us because one of the productions that went back to filming, it's a wrap-up. So we just had a few shooting days left, and we have relocated part of the shoot also to Poland because it's a co-production with Poland for a TVP channel. So it's easier than launching a production from scratch. But I do think that it does also make us better producers in a way. It's kind of, you just start thinking on your feet, you become flexible, you become able to make decisions, just kind of become goal-oriented. And I love all these stories you're sharing about, filming during the sirens, etc. But talking of international business, because these productions that were cancelled, they were big and financed from the global market, etc. What do you think is there a responsibility for the audiovisual industry globally to support storytelling in places like Ukraine, places like Israel, some other places where war or conflicts might be going on? Like, where do you think the industry should be standing on that? Like, should they work with us? Should they work with us more? Or should they be risk averse and just let us be?
I don't think you can force, especially private companies, to go and shoot in the war zone, or even if it's not war zone, in a place that the insurance won't cover. So it's, but I think we do have a responsibility to help Ukraine to tell their stories. And I think also it's not just responsibility, it's fascinating. War creates so many amazing stories. I just following, a few Instagram accounts of the zoo in the Odessa Zoo. It's like, it's a TV series already. It writes itself, as we say. There are so many amazing stories going on right now, and I'm sure there are Ukrainian creators that have now these ideas, and we need to help them to come out.
So one of the ways, and I have to say that the industry has been very helpful, and it is kind of like a huge ship that it does take a while for it to make a stand, but it has been reaching out to us. It has been looking for ways to work with Ukraine. But one of the ways the global audiovisual industry is trying to help us, I'm kind of a bit confused about that. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, because it feels like an immediate way to help, but basically what a lot of producers I know out of Europe were offering is that, well, if you have great people who are looking for a job and they have left Ukraine, then we will be happy to hire them. And that immediately, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because yes, that's help, it's great for the people, but it also potentially might lead to a brain drain. So what's your experience?
So we have a brain drain in Israel. The best writers and the best directors are working a lot with on international productions, and then they're not available. Even if they still live in Israel, some left, some still living in Israel, but work. If you do a small Israeli production, you have troubles finding good writers and good directors because they all work now in Hollywood or Europe. I'm one example that brain drained from Israel. But there is a positive side, because even if we live now abroad, we still tell stories that are connected to Israel. And these people come back with American budgets as Deegan Tyrant. It's Gidi Raff, who did Homeland, who did Prisoners of War, that became Homeland, that came to film in Israel, and then Deegan Tyrant, who came to film in Israel. So they kind of bring back this creativity with more money, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. So you shouldn't stop them from going away. They will come back with money.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. We will welcome them. And the money. Yeah, you're right, because even trying to imagine my future, if I stop working for a Ukrainian company, I can't see myself producing stories that are not connected to Ukraine somehow. That's it. It's, yeah. Another thing that kind of bothers me, even though we seem to be focused on finding a way to work together, meaning the global industry and Ukrainian, but then also there's an example of COVID, which is another major crisis that the whole world lived through. And as an industry, we weirdly found it easy to look away. If we look at the productions that came out in the past 2 years, it's only rarely that COVID is somehow featured, and we just chose to look away. So I guess I'm feeling scared that this is what the industry might choose.
No, I think you should not be worried. I think COVID is just not, it's like a bit boring and sexy, and not sexy. The war in Ukraine is, the war is much more interesting. Just COVID is like,
nothing is
it's
happening.
nothing, it's just depressing what people are sitting inside houses and people with masks. It's not, I don't think the war of Ukraine will be forgotten. I think now, like, you can't really keep on the news for 4 months the same thing and naturally it goes down, but the amazing story is going to come out. And I think also an amazing story is going to come out about COVID. I think it will happen eventually. But I don't think it's really comparable. The war are much more dramatic. I'm doing a series, No Man's Land is about a war in Syria. It's far from everybody and it's kind of forgotten, but there is an amazing story there and we're making a TV series and it's succeeding. We're doing season 2 right now, so.
I hope everyone agrees, and we'll hold you to that. We have to tell these stories. Almost like a bonus question: what do you think is the relationship of humor and war? Because I find it fascinating. It's a way to process trauma, but sometimes it almost feels a bit too soon. Because how can you make jokes when the war is still going on? What's your experience?
So Israel, you know this less because comedies travel less well, but Israel have amazing comedies, and I think this is like, Israel is a cynical, Israel is a sarcastic. I think that's what war makes people be, and I think you're gonna have amazing comedies, but unfortunately comedies don't travel well. Humor, like, it's less translatable. Israel has amazing comedies that are not bought or remade most of the time.
Well, there's a project that we're now developing that I guess is going to test your theory in that sense. It's basically like The Office, but set in the bunker. Because ultimately, as the war started and everyone went downstairs, hiding from the bombs above, but it's actually as scary down below because you're in a confined space with limited resources with people you don't like. So let's see how that works out. We are running out of time, so I don't know if there's anything else you want to share or a word of advice.
Or maybe there are any questions, because even in French you can ask us. We have a thing. Yes? Yes, we can hear. Here comes the person with the microphone.
Hi. It's great hearing your stories. I've worked in conflict zones myself, like Northern Ireland and Kosovo. My question really is, and I haven't heard it yet from you, is how do you see your role as peacemakers? Because our function as creatives, as program makers, and I've seen this, in the healing, as it were, of the Second World War in Europe, how much actually films and TV programs helped heal the rift between Germany and the other countries that had wronged by not portraying them as animals all the time. And when I watch the news right now and I see Ukrainian soldiers talking, and people, of course, talking about Russians as animals and all that sort of stuff. At what point do you think you guys can actually get involved in the healing process, rather than just kind of, if you want of a better word, benefiting from the conflict for your stories, actually being proactive and start making programs that hopefully will heal the rifts that cause this?
So Israeli industry, I think, not as an industry was trying, but a lot of filmmakers are trying to do this and tell the other side story. Israel is a bad example. It's been not successful. Was very unsuccessful. I think it's very early to talk about this with the Ukraine and Russian context, but I hope in a few years, and Ukrainians and Russians are so close in terms of culture. Can you see the world where industry does this role of being a peacemaker between Ukraine and Russia at some point?
Well, I would struggle with that now because it's I'm living through the rifts and the conflict. But I think it's almost a philosophical question in that sense because do we have the responsibility to mend the society? I think we just, I don't think that we do. I think like what we have to do is to tell these stories truthfully. And to channel our experience, and hopefully, because this is actually the experience that Europe first, but also world is living through right now, is that we are actively proving that the power of us, like we want to galvanize the unity through these stories. I don't think we need to actually actively put it as the subject matter of this series. We just tell these stories hoping for the power of creativity being greater than the power of nuclear state or something like that. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't want it to become a propaganda, the stories we tell, that like, let's make peace and shake hands. No.
Thank you, ladies. I think we have to go on. I will note content is your weapon, and I hope it will be efficient. So thank you for coming, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm calling on stage Heli Howard and Sevda